Welcome to Totally Awesome Films, and in this episode we're going to talk about From Russia with Love.
And told him she wanted to defect. She said she'd turn it over to us, on one condition, that you went out to Istanbul and brought her and the machine back to England. Here's a snapshot Kerry managed to get of her.
Well, I don't know too much about cryptography, sir, but Lektor could decode their top-secret signals. The whole thing's so fantastic, it just could be true.
That had occurred to me. Besides, the Russians haven't been up to any tricks recently.
Well, really, I'm not too busy at the moment, sir.
James Bond becomes entangled in a deadly trap set by the criminal organization SPECTRE, posing as a mission to help a Soviet consulate clerk defect with a valuable decoding device called the Lektor. SPECTRE uses her as a pawn in a revenge plot for the death of Dr. No. Bond travels to Istanbul, retrieves the device, and escapes with Tatiana on board the Orient Express, where he faces off against a deadly assassin, Red Grant. Bond defeats SPECTRE, destroys their plans, and sails away with Tatiana, continuing his string of thrilling victories against the shadowy organization. United Artists was so pleased with the first movie, Dr. No, that they immediately approved the sequel and doubled the budget to $2 million. This is still a small budget as Hollywood movies go, but it was an acknowledgement of the success of Dr. No. In fact, From Russia with Love would be released in England while Dr. No was still at the end of its theater run. Terence, who did a phenomenal job directing the last movie, Dr. No, was hired again for From Russia with Love, and they chose From Russia with Love when a few years back, President John F. Kennedy publicly announced in an interview with Life magazine that he was a huge James Bond fan and that From Russia with Love was one of his top 10 favorite books. This is what drew attention to the character in the US and inspired Cubby Broccoli to buy the rights and help get United Artists to approve the first movie. After production of this film, Eon actually gave President Kennedy a special private screening in the White House, and he loved the film. Now, unfortunately, 3 days later, JFK was tragically assassinated in Dallas, but From Russia with Love was the last movie he got to see. What inspired Ian Fleming to write the book From Russia with Love in 1956 was news headlines. In 1950, a U.S. naval attaché, Eugene Simon Karp, was assassinated and thrown from the Orient Express train by a communist agent, and Ian Fleming was fascinated by this and decided to write a movie around this event. The producers chose to shoot in Istanbul because Ian Fleming himself had been involved in an Interpol conference in Istanbul, and the higher budget allowed them to shoot on location at exotic locales. Screenwriters Joanna Harwood and Richard Maybaum, who wrote Dr. No, returned to write the screenplay for From Russia with Love. While From Russia with Love is the fifth book, one book before Dr. No, the sixth book, they decided to make this movie a direct sequel to Dr. No. They switched the chronology of the stories. In the book, the antagonists are the Soviet undercover agency, SMERSH. However, they changed it to SPECTRE since SPECTRE had already been introduced in Dr. No. In the novels, they wouldn't be introduced until the ninth book, Thunderball. They had SPECTRE getting revenge against James Bond for killing their top agent, Dr. No, making this movie a direct sequel. Sean Connery was given a $100,000 bonus on top of his $58,000 salary to return as James Bond. Already the plot here is more complex and more coherent. The pacing is improved and the villain is more threatening. The action's more grand and the espionage is more complex. And Sean Connery just seems more comfortable in the role. At the beginning of the movie, James Bond is in M's office, and M is trying to talk about how this defector has personally requested that James Bond accompany her. And of course, Bond, nor M, buys it.
No, it's some sort of trap.
He doesn't like it. And then M shows him a photograph of the agent, and James Bond looks at the picture, and it's a beautiful face. And you see James Bond's face sort of loosen up, kind of melt, and then he says,
Really, I'm not too busy at the moment, sir.
And Sean Connery just plays that scene brilliantly, and it tells you all you need to know about James Bond. The fact that he's willing to go into a SPECTRE trap, risk his life, get involved in a web of international conspiracy and espionage just so he can meet a beautiful woman. And here's an interesting bit of trivia for the hardcore James Bond fan. In a novel, James Bond does not drive an Aston Martin. He certainly doesn't drive a Lotus. He drives a Bentley. In the books, James Bond loves his beloved vintage 1930 blower Bentley. And this is the only movie where he drives a Bentley accurate to the novels. And it's a Bentley 3.5-liter drophead coupe. And in the next film, Goldfinger, he'll drive the iconic Aston Martin, which will symbolize James Bond on film. So we are introduced to three new characters. And Robert Shaw is fantastic as the main heavy villain, Donald Red Grant. He looks tall, he's buff, he's physically imposing, and he's barely recognizable from his better-known role to our generation as Quint in Steven Spielberg's Jaws. Lotte Lenya is intriguing as the diminutive but formidable Rosa Klebb, the lady with a knife shooting out of her shoe. And we also get Spectre leader number 1, aka Ernst Stravo Blofeld, played by Anthony Dawson, who played the Spectre agent Professor Dent in the last movie, and here his voice is dubbed by Viennese actor Eric Pullman.
Our organization did not arrange for you to come over from the Russians just for amusement, number 3.
It is now 3 formidable villains against our sole protagonist, and we'll talk more about these 3 characters in a minute. And from the beginning of the film, we feel that Bond might really be in danger, and we are off for a roller coaster ride. However, the production did not go as easy as it did in the last film. There's going to be production delays, they're going to go over budget, there's going to be helicopter crashes, explosions, car accidents, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. The production of this movie was a complete mess, which makes it extra incredible that the movie turned out so well. This film actually introduces 2 new elements to the traditions that were established in Dr. No, and this is going to help solidify what we now call the James Bond formula. So already we get the pattern of the gun barrel sequence that was introduced in the last movie, Dr. No, and it is still stuntman Bob Simmons in the sequence. But from here we have 2 new elements that will become permanent James Bond fixtures, the opening action sequence and then the musical montage. And these fixtures will be in every Bond movie going forward. We also get Desmond Llewellyn as Q himself. Peter Burton, who played the quartermaster Major Boothroyd in the last film, was not available for this movie, so they recast him with a new actor. And Desmond Llewellyn will go on to become a James Bond staple. He'll be in 17 James Bond movies, more than any other actor. In 1963, Terence Young asked Desmond Llewellyn to read for the part of Major Boothroyd. Therefore, we know that this is supposed to be the same quartermaster Major Boothroyd who was played by Peter Burton in the last movie. So it is the same character, but recast. However, to avoid confusion, they refer to him here as simply the equipments officer, which made some fans think that he was a separate character. Now, the letter Q for Q branch was first mentioned in Ian Fleming's first book, Casino Royale, and its head, Major Boothroyd, first made his appearance in Fleming's 6th book, Dr. No. Terence Young knew Desmond Llewellyn from a film he directed called They Were Not Divided, where he had a thick Welsh accent.
I coshed one of them Island Division chaps. Costume good and proper. Oh, you mark my words, wacky boy.
His own natural native Welsh accent, and wanted him for the role of Q because they envisioned Q as having a Welsh accent. However, Desmond Llewellyn strongly believed that Q should have an upper-class aristocratic English accent.
Is that all, sir?
And was able to persuade Terence Young and Ian Fleming, and was hired for the role. He would be in every James Bond movie from here on out except Live and Let Die, and he continued to play Q until The World Is Not Enough. While it appears he's saying goodbye to the character after introducing John Cleese as R and saying that
always have an escape plan.
But this was just a coincidence. He and Eon had planned for him to be in the next James Bond movie, but unfortunately, 3 weeks after the premiere of the release of World Is Not Enough, he was driving home after signing autographs and was involved in a car accident and died at the age of 85. And with Q, we get the introduction of the clever spy gadget referred to as Q gadgets in the novels. And this time it's a briefcase. It has a folding sniper rifle with 20 rounds of ammunition, it has hidden throwing knives, it has 50 gold sovereigns, and it has a trick latch where if you open it improperly, a tear gas bomb detonates in the victim's face. It's a simple but pretty cool Q gadget. And of course the Q gadgets will get much better in the next movie, Goldfinger. We also get the trope of the uber strong henchman. A super strong man, nearly invincible, who's also colorful and larger than life.
He seems fit enough.
And fiercely loyal to the main villain, and we feel that James Bond really might be in trouble. The strong henchman here is Donald Red Grant, played by Robert Shaw. His biggest role is being Quint in Steven Spielberg's 1975 mega hit Jaws.
This sharp, swallow you whole. Shaking, tenderizing, down you go.
In fact, Steven Spielberg decided to cast Robert Shaw in Jaws after seeing him in this movie. And he is fantastic here as Donald Grant. He's fierce, he's strong, very cunning, and we feel he is the Spectre version of James Bond, a worthy nemesis to our hero. They both have short, tight haircuts, but he has blonde hair to Bond's black hair. They're both tough and masculine. While Bond exudes warmth, Grant is cold and calculating. He is Bond's opposite number. However, Robert Shaw was 4 inches shorter than Sean Connery, so he had to stand on a box whenever they did their scenes together. We get so many elements that are associated with the entire James Bond franchise that have become fodder for any James Bond satire or parody. We get Blofeld stroking his long-haired white cat. We get the concept of the femme fatale who switches allegiances due to what has become known as, well, let's say, James Bond's masculine charms. We get exotic locales, and we get over-the-top action. Another thing I really appreciated about this film was the portrayal of certain real-world complexity in the espionage game. When Bond lands in Istanbul, he notices he's being followed, and the chauffeur casually tells him,
"They follow us, we follow them. It's a sort of understanding we have."
And I love this. One of my favorite scenes in the film, the scene which many cite as one of the best fight scenes in all of cinema, is on the Orient Express when our villain, Agent Red Grant, meets up with Bond and pretends to be his MI6 contact. Now we the audience, we know this is a Spectre agent, but Bond doesn't, and it creates this tense, slow burn, and we the audience are just squirming in our seats. And I thought this was such a brilliant scene. This is pure Alfred Hitchcock in action. And then the scene turns into one of the best, one of the most realistic fight sequences ever put on film. And it's interesting how this action scene, filmed over 60 years ago, is still a better fight scene than many of the fight scenes filmed today. And I think at that time, from the beginning of cinema to the late 1980s, fight scenes were clearly done by actors who couldn't fight. And their punches don't look very impactful, they don't have good technique when they're punching, obviously no fight training, and it sort of looks pathetic on screen. And it looks unrealistic and unconvincing. Well, in 2000, post-Matrix, when Hollywood films began to be influenced by Hong Kong cinema, it sort of shifted far in the other direction. And now, in modern films, when you see a fight scene, everyone is a professional martial artist with too perfect a technique that looks too choreographed. And now every scene feels like a Hong Kong kung fu film, and that comes across as equally unrealistic and unconvincing, but in the other direction. But the fight scene here in this movie, it looks real. It really does look like two trained fighters really fighting to the end. And that really adds tension and impact to the film because it doesn't look choreographed. It looks very dramatic and looks very real. And I think only a few films have really topped the realism or even matched the realism of this fight scene. Because director Terence was a college boxer and knew how to fight and had a vision for the scene. And Sean Connery and Robert Shaw actually did the fight scenes themselves, and this short sequence took 3 weeks to put on film. But I think the final product is well worth it. So I'm interested in hearing your opinions. What did you think of this fight scene? Can you think of another Hollywood action scene that is as good or better than the scene presented here? Let me know in the comments below. Agent number 3, Rosa Klebb, was played by Austrian singer Lotte Lenya, who was 65 years old when she starred in From Russia with Love. And in 1963, she was cast as Rosa Klebb. And the poisoned shoe used in this movie was actually based on a real Soviet weapon known as the KGB shoe dagger. Now, another interesting thing about the book is that From Russia with Love comes before Dr. No in the novels. Now, remember in Dr. No when M hands Bond his Walter PBK and talks about how he had some problems and was injured, almost killed in his last mission? Well, that is a reference to the events of From Russia with Love in the book. And the reason why he's even in Jamaica is that he's at a hospital doing convalescent rest after actually getting stuck with Rosa Klebb's poison knife in the novel. This is because in Ian Fleming's book, the 1957 From Russia with Love, this was Ian Fleming's 5th book, and he was already getting tired of writing the character. So that was going to be the last James Bond book. So at the end, Rosa Klebb manages to kick Bond and impale him with a poison shoe knife, and the novel ends with Bond falling to the floor and presumably dying. After From Russia with Love, Ian Fleming decided to publish his 6th book on James Bond, the novel Dr. No. For the role of femme fatale Tatiana Romanova, the producers auditioned many women, but the role went to Daniela Bianchi, mostly because she was Sean Connery's personal pick. Now, unfortunately, she had a very strong Italian accent and could not resolve that accent despite numerous intense English lessons. So in the end, the producers just decided to dub her voice over with Barbara Jefford. So that is not her voice you're hearing in the movie From Russia with Love.
That are going to be changed.
Mexican actor, international legend Pedro Armendáriz plays Karim Bey. John Ford actually called Cubby Broccoli and asked if he had a role for Pedro Armendáriz to be in his movie and to cast him as a personal favor to him, which Cubby Broccoli, of course, obliged. And sadly, he had terminal cancer during production of this film and actually took the role so he could leave money for his family. And director Terence was very accommodating and let Armendáriz film the scenes earlier in production, and sure enough, before he could finish all his scenes, he filmed most of them, but had 2 or 3 scenes left, but actually had to go in the hospital where he would pass away. But the producer's director, Terence would pay him a full salary that he was able to leave a considerable sum of money that he made from this movie to his children. But it is a really sad story for this legendary actor because he was apparently in a lot of pain during the end of his life from cancer, and when he was at the UCLA Medical Center, he actually snuck in a gun and fatally shot himself in the chest. And it is a very tragic story. But years later, his son would actually follow in his father's footsteps and become an actor himself, and was actually in a James Bond movie. The actor is Pedro Almendarez Jr., named after his father, and he will play General Hector Lopez, the president of Isthmus, in License to Kill. Sylvia Trench returns as James Bond's kind of girlfriend, and she was going to be a regular character in the franchise, but this was dropped, so this will be her last film. Walter Gotell plays Morenzi, a Spectre agent who trains on Spectre Island, and he will go on to be a recurring James Bond character, General Gogol, head of the KGB, for the Roger Moore era of Bond. Monty Norman was not asked to return, and John Barry was hired or promoted as the primary soundtrack composer and will continue to compose James Bond scores for 11 Bond films. And he also went on to write the soundtrack for Dances with Wolves, The Cotton Club, Out of Africa, Chaplin, and oddly enough, Bruce Lee's film Game of Death. But he will go on to win 5 Academy Awards. Ken Adam, who blew everyone away with his production designs for Dr. No, drew the attention of Stanley Kubrick, who hired him for Dr. Strangelove. In this movie, he was replaced by Sid Cain, but Ken Adam would return to design the sets for Goldfinger, You Only Live Twice, Diamonds Are Forever, The Spy Who Loved Me, and Moonraker. Here's an interesting bit of trivia. Ken Adam also designed the famous car in a movie adaptation of Ian Fleming's other famous novel, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Ken Adam will be nominated for 4 Academy Awards, winning 2. We can't talk about this movie without talking about the 1959 Alfred Hitchcock classic North by Northwest, which came out 3 years before this movie was an international box office smash hit. It is obvious that From Russia with Love was strongly influenced by North by Northwest. James Bond's look and dress, his suits, mirror those of Cary Grant, and the story structure of this movie mirrors the story structure of North by Northwest. The train scene where Red Grant has the drop on James Bond is pure suspense from Alfred Hitchcock's playbook, that slow burn Hitchcock is always talking about. And finally, the MacGuffin that everyone in the movie is after, in From Russia with Love, the Lektor, is eerily similar to the MacGuffin of the microfilm of confidential government documents that the villains are trying to smuggle in North by Northwest. And also in this movie, there's a helicopter scene which was noted by fans to be reminiscent of the airplane crash scene in North by Northwest. Well, this is not a coincidence. You see, there is actually no corresponding helicopter chase scene in the book From Russia with Love, and sure enough, the helicopter scene was a direct homage to Alfred Hitchcock's airplane crop duster scene in North by Northwest. The initial plans were to film the helicopter scene in Istanbul. However, this proved to be difficult, and they eventually moved the production to Scotland. Another scene that was added to the end of the movie to buff up the action sequence is not only the helicopter scene, but also the boat scene. Like the helicopter scene, the boat scene is not in the book, but was added after production to buff up the action of the movie. The boat scene was influenced from an action scene called The Red Beret, which was also directed by Terence Young. Like the helicopter scene, the boat scene was also going to be filmed in Istanbul. However, the waters around Istanbul proved very difficult due to the high waves, and the boats kept nearly crashing. After principal photography on location in Istanbul, the entire production was moved to Scotland, and the production was seriously late and over budget. In an attempt to catch up on the time, Terence Young had the crew work late shifts, and they worked so hard that apparently Danielle Bianchi's driver fell asleep at the wheel while driving her to work, and they got in a car accident. Her car rolled over several times and almost went into the water. Sean Connery, who was in the car behind them, came out and helped pull Daniela Bianchi out of her car. Fortunately for production, the complicated helicopter scene actually went off without a hitch. Eventually, much of the helicopter scene was actually filmed with a miniature remote-controlled helicopter. Interestingly, a helicopter crash did occur, but not during the helicopter scene, but actually while scouting locations for the boat scene. Terence Young was in a helicopter scouting locations when the pilot of the helicopter crashed the helicopter into the lake, almost drowning them both. After being rescued from a helicopter that was submerged in the water, Terence Young got out and apparently just started directing again. When it came to filming the spectacular boat scene, this involved an incredible explosion of oil on the water. Well, this is a very complicated setup, and they really had one chance to do this right, and they did it. They did it successfully. It seemed to go well. The explosion was grand. However, after the explosion, it turned out that none of the cameras were rolling. You can't make this up. And they had to reset everything up and film it again the next day. Filming was completed, and they only had 3 months to edit this movie before the premiere. However, they were concerned that this movie was a mess. Much of the sequences didn't make sense, the plot did not seem coherent. It was up to editor Peter Hunt to fix the movie, and he only had 3 months to do so. Well, Peter Hunt went to work, and he did just that. The work Peter Hunt did on this movie was brilliant. He reordered sequences, made the plot more coherent, and basically saved the movie. In reordering the movie, one of the things Peter Hunt did is put one of the action sequences before the musical credits, thus unintentionally creating the pre-credit action sequence. Ultimately, Peter Hunt did a monumental job in the editing process. It is believed that Peter Hunt saved this movie in the edit. 5 years from now, Peter Hunt will get the chance to direct his own James Bond movie, and he'll direct the brilliant On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which many regard as one of the best James Bond movies. So the final cut of this film was completed on time. So how did this film do? And how did it do against North by Northwest, the movie it was basically copying? Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest was made on a budget of $4.3 million and made a respectable $9.8 million at the box office. And From Russia with Love actually blew this out of the water. From Russia with Love was an even bigger hit than Dr. No, and it was both a critical hit and a box office success, doubling Dr. No's receipts. Made on a budget of only $2 million, it made $12.5 million in its first release and would go on to make $78 million worldwide, equivalent to $804 million today when adjusted for inflation. And that's 8 times more than the movie it basically copied, North by Northwest, and only had half of that film's budget. So From Russia with Love was an uncontested smash hit. Now, do you know about the controversial audio track? Apparently in 1991, when Criterion released their Laserdisc with all the audio commentary by director Terence Young, well, apparently Terence Young, who was 76 at the time, was retired and maybe just didn't care. Well, he was a little too open and candid and frank about his time directing James Bond and revealed a little too much information about some of the backstage gossip that occurred while filming this movie. For example, he had talked about how he thought Ian Fleming was an alcoholic. Terence Young named people on the set that were smoking marijuana, named them by name. He talked about how actor Armandaris would be in pain from cancer and all of a sudden disappear for a few minutes and then come back appearing all smiling and energetic, obviously having taken opiate painkillers. And on this audio track, he also talked about Lotte Lenya's insatiable womanly appetites and even referred to her as, quote, a freak, unquote. Cubby Broccoli was furious, and who knows, maybe he got some calls from United Artists. He demanded Criterion recall every Laserdisc and presumably burned every disc he could find. Well, he didn't burn all of them. You can find Terence Young's audio commentary by doing a little Google search and watching it on YouTube, and it's fascinating and disturbing, and you will be shocked with how candid Terence Young was. It is an absolute must-listen. And today, From Russia with Love is still regarded as one of the best James Bond films. Numerous actors, including Lois Maxwell, who played Moneypenny, including the producers, they cite this film as their favorite James Bond movie, and Sean Connery cites this as one of his favorite James Bond films. This film is so good that it was turned into a video game in 2005 by Electronic Arts and is the only successful pre-Pierce Brosnan video game starring James Bond, and it is the only James Bond video game that was not a movie tie-in. Not only did reclusive Sean Connery support the game by allowing his likeness and voice from the 1963 film to be used, he was so impressed with the game and of this new emerging creative medium that he actually recorded new voiceover for the video game.
A dry martini. Shaken, not stirred.
And that is so cool and unheard of. And that's how much he loved From Russia with Love. And so with the mega success of this movie, you know there's going to be a third film. And From Russia with Love was going to be a tough act to follow and pretty hard to beat, but the next film is going to do just that. Join me next time as we talk about one of the best James Bond movies of all time, Goldfinger. So that ends this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great time.